How to Act Like an Alpha by Sarah Marks. A prequel story to Pride, Prejudice, and Pledging. 21st Century Austen Book 2.5. I have a confession, Jane said as they got to the door of their favorite pizza place. You didn't lure me away from midterms for pizza and guy talk? Shocking, Lizbeth said. I'm serious, Lizbeth, this is an emergency, and I need you to be open to a new idea. Jane had been anxious about something for a couple of days. Ever since they got back from the sorority meeting on Sunday night, she had been pacing rooms and making sure Lizbeth heard deep sighs of frustration. Now it was Wednesday, and this was the most passive-aggressive Jane had ever been in her entire life. Lizbeth was fascinated and letting it go unacknowledged just to see if Jane would have a blow-up from the pressure. Charlotte had even started asking Lizbeth to wager on what Jane would do next. Lizbeth had agreed to go out for pizza only to see if Jane would finally break. Now Lizbeth looked in the large windows of the pizza shop and saw Gia, her sorority big sister, sitting at the table with Mandy, the current Phi Alpha Pi president. Lizbeth realized precisely what this was about. At Sunday's meeting, sophomore Lydia had announced her intention to run for sorority president next year. The entire room had been split on this, and both Gia and Mandy had clearly been unhappy. Lydia had been the main reason they had been on academic probation all year. Lizbeth hadn't cared about it until January when Jane asked for help. Lizbeth and Charlotte had only joined the sorority to hang out with Jane, but it was Jane who was most involved. In September, when Mandy had informed all the sisters that they had the year to get off academic probation, she had also assumed this would spur them all to action. She assumed they would focus on studying. That hadn't happened, and it was Lydia who had the worst GPA and encouraged many other sisters to ignore the probation requirements. The other worst offender had been the former sorority secretary Heather, who had been kicked out of school for repeated probations of her own. Jane had picked up secretary duties in January and begged Lizbeth to help the sisters develop better study habits. It had worked. On Sunday, it had been announced that they would be removed from probation after finals, no longer at risk of being kicked off campus and closed to new members. Lizbeth followed Jane to the table where Gia and Mandy sat. We ordered Lizbeth's favorite, Gia said when they sat down. Pepperoni and onion? Jane asked. Of course. Lizbeth rolled her eyes, making sure Gia saw her. Please, Lizbeth, hear us out before you dismiss the idea, Jane begged, practically whining. Lizbeth said nothing as they sat down, and Gia seemed to understand the message. We can't let Lydia get elected president, Gia said. You know she'll get the sorority kicked off campus, and the alumni will murder us if we let that happen. Really? Lizbeth asked. Isn't that a little melodramatic? Murder? You don't disagree about Lydia, then? Mandy said. Lizbeth shook her head. Right, then let's not beat around the bush. This was something Lizbeth liked about Mandy. She was direct and honest, seems to be allergic to bullshit. Agreed, Lizbeth said, not wanting to torture Jane anymore. We want you to run for president. Why not Jane? Lizbeth asked. Jane vigorously shook her head. I don't want to be president, but if you do it, then I'll be your membership VP. Lizbeth looked at her best friend and considered the proposition. Why me? I haven't been that active and a lot of the sisters don't even know me. That's why you're perfect, Gia said. You don't have baggage, and you stepped up once already. You're the reason we're getting off probation. You're an alpha, Mandy said. You push back when people try to force you to do anything you don't want to do. That's bold of you to say, considering you're trying to convince me to do something I don't want to do. I think you secretly want to do this, Jane said quietly. Lizbeth turned and looked at the one woman at the table who really knew her. Why do you say that? It didn't take a lot to convince you to start running the study groups and do organization workshops. Jane's right, Gia said. You were all too happy to do that. Lizbeth chuckled, remembering the request for her help and how quickly she had agreed. Yes, but I know how to do that. I don't know anything about running a sorority. I'll help you, Jane said. I've been paying attention. The sorority does leadership training for new officers. This happens more often than you'd expect. They pay for your entire trip and will run webinars during the year. You just have to say yes, Mandy clarified. Help me, Obi-Wan, you're my only help, Gia said with a dry laugh. Lizbeth looked at her big sister. While I certainly appreciate the comparison, I don't think I can do it. I have so much already going on next year. The thesis, applying to graduate schools, and who knows what else. Plus, I don't think I want to live in a dorm-style situation again. I don't think I've ever shared an actual bedroom. What if Marie helped us? Jane asked. Lizbeth considered her own little sister, who was a stickler for rules and keeping things in order. Lizbeth had often wondered about Marie's reasons for joining a sorority. She didn't fit any sorority girl stereotype. How? If you say yes, she's agreed to be secretary. What about Charlotte? Lizbeth asked. Considering the way she laughed at the idea when I asked her in January, I didn't even bother asking her, Gia said. Lizbeth looked at Jane. Promise me you won't desert me in the middle of this. I promise, you know how much this means to me. Lizbeth laughed. Jane loved their sorority and would never abandon her sisters. That was at the heart of who Jane was. I thought your head was going to explode. Does that mean yes? Mandy asked. Lizbeth rolled her eyes again, for good measure. Fine. How did it go? Charlotte asked when Lizbeth and Jane got back from dinner. She said yes. Jane said with a sigh so deep, Lizbeth half expected her to collapse. Then I should tell you something I learned today. What? Jane asked, looking panicked again. Lydia won't be put down that easily. We've lined it up. I know, Lizbeth is president, you're doing membership, and Marie is secretary. What about events? You know that's what she really wants. Did someone tell you something? Lizbeth asked. I was at the house today, and I overheard something. I don't think Lydia knew I was listening, but she's shitty at being quiet. She's positive Gia and Mandy were trying to find someone to challenge her. Does she know it's Lizbeth? Jane asked. She didn't say, but she might not know yet. She made it clear she would just steamroll her agenda and parties onto the calendar. Lizbeth looked back at Jane, hoping she would have an answer. What? You can handle Lydia. Just do what you do to every other freaking bully you meet. What's that exactly? Lizbeth asked. Out-alpha them. Jane said and collapsed onto the couch in a fit of giggles. Did you break Jane at dinner? What does that even mean? Charlotte asked. Apparently, I'm the alpha in a pack, Lizbeth said with a shrug. Charlotte threw her head back and laughed. Oh, yeah, that's absolutely true, she said when the laughter subsided. Am I really? I always thought I was just driven. Yes, and single-minded, and you don't back down when you're sure you're right. Lydia has nothing on you. You're what she wants to be, Jane said. But she doesn't know you well enough to realize that. You, on the other hand, know exactly who she is and how to get her to back down. Lizbeth thought back to her few interactions with Lydia. She always seemed like a hyperactive, energetic puppy. Lizbeth recalled that the younger woman was also a fantastic planner but only applied the skills to party planning and not schoolwork. What if I nominate her for the event planning VP? Lizbeth asked her friends. Both of them got quiet. That just might work, Jane eventually said. Can't hurt, Charlotte agreed. We've successfully elected a new president, Mandy said, coming back into the room with the election committee. Lizbeth, Charlotte, and Jane sat in the back of the room waiting for the election results. In the weeks that had passed since Lizbeth had agreed to run, things had been contentious in the sorority house. Lizbeth hadn't needed to engage in the arguments, and if she tried to stop them, it only seemed to get worse. Instead, she acted as disinterested as she always had. Her speech had been simple: let's not go backwards. Congratulations, Lizbeth. Amidst the cheers and boos, someone called for a recount. It wasn't even close. In the end, Lizbeth won by a landslide, Mandy said, and shut down any further discussion. Lizbeth, do you have something you want to say? Lizbeth got to her feet and looked at Lydia, making sure to put on her best fake smile. Thank you, everyone. I want next year to be one where we continue to rebuild our position as the university's oldest and most respected sorority. I hope you all are ready to do what you can to help. Thank you, Lizbeth, Mandy said. Let's move into programming vice president elections. Are there any nominations? Lizbeth's hand shot up in the air. Lots of hands went up for this one, and it was probably because Lydia had told her friends to nominate her for this position when she lost president. This is what Lydia really wanted after all. Okay, Mandy said. Lizbeth was first. I'd like to nominate Lydia. I can't think of a better person to head up our programming for the year. Lizbeth knew the younger woman's win was guaranteed already, but relished the look of annoyance on Lydia's face. Lydia might have thought she was going to subvert Lizbeth's plans, but this made it clear that Lizbeth was ready for anything Lydia threw at her. Now that's how you act like an alpha, Jane whispered into Lizbeth's ear. Do you want to read more? This book is in A Little More Phi Alpha Pi, a short story companion book. Also read Pride, Prejudice, and Pledging to learn how Lizbeth survives the year as sorority president. Like or subscribe to this YouTube channel for more audiobooks and more.